You have a huge amount of courses that you not only know about, but that you've created and managed. What are you seeing that advisors are really dialing into and finding the greatest value to continue to make them better advisors?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing right now, Matt, is certainly there are rule changes, rules and regulations, and
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a bit of a top down and bottom up demand for that. Of course, your dealer firm, your compliance officers are talking about things like client focused reforms in Canada is a big thing. There's a big new regulations over the last couple of years that have come into play. So making sure to know and understand those, making sure that you're kind of following along with that. But it's also a demand from the bottom up. Advisors wanting to make sure that they understand what those rules and regulations and what that landscape is.
Hello and welcome to another Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. Now, all of you know that we are a Canadian company, that I, as a person in the States, own a Canadian company with my partner, Kirk Lowe. He lives in Oshawa, Ontario. And as a Canadian company, we're always looking at ways to try to find a way to kind of get into the Canadian market because there's huge amounts of financial professionals there who desperately, desperately need our help. And so I met this crazy guy who actually helps provide education for all of these Canadian financial services professionals. And I wanted to just bring him on the show. I'm going to talk about a couple of major things today. So the first thing I want to talk about is what continuing education really should mean philosophically, because John is a real expert when it comes to this. Number two, what are the issues in continuing education across the entire continent of North America? And finally, what advisors should really be focusing on from an education perspective. So John Waldron is our guest today. He's the founder, CEO, everything with Learnedly, and he is a good friend of us, all of us here at ProudMouth. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's really great to be here. Actually, this is it's fantastic to be a part of these conversations that you're having. It's wonderful. So thanks for having me.
All right, let's talk a little bit about your history. How did you get to do what you're doing now, and what does the landscape look like?
Yeah. So the short of it is, I kind of discovered financial services. I was an advisor years ago, and it all started really by discovering a passion for financial literacy and financial education. I was actually traveling in my van across Canada after I finished a degree in psychology and had no idea what I wanted to do. Living in my van, tour guide, not making a lot of money, I started to read a lot about how to make money and how to manage money. And that's really what opened my eyes to financial services and what ultimately got me into the industry. But the passion really was around the education side of it. It was the empowering side. And so I went from being an advisor in the industry to then focusing on advisor education and working for the major course providers in the space, and then ultimately decided to strike out on my own and create our own offering.
I think there's a lot of advisors who are listening right now who think the thing I love most about being an advisor is the educational component. Do you still have that passion for that level of education? Because you're like knee deep in all sorts of crazy bureaucracy and stuff now.
Yeah. It has taken me into a path I did not expect to go into, but I think some big challenges are fun to tackle in some respects. The thing, Matt, about education is that it's empowering. If you've taken a first aid course, I took one when I was 12 years old, and I didn't wish harm on anyone, but I walked out of there thinking, like, if something happened to someone, I'm at the ready to help. And I found that over my career in financial services, it's a lot similar. You learn some new things, you learn some new tactics, you learn some new strategies that help clients, and suddenly you feel quite empowered to want to find those clients and help those clients with those problems, help solve those. And that I think is the essence of education in general. But proficiency or continuing education, that's really the thing that you want to pull out. That's the thing that we try to pull out. And that's the best part of continuing education. The worst part about continuing education is all the administrative stuff and all the regulatory burden that goes around it. And that's largely what we try to solve for. In addition to making content, we're also trying to be mindful of all the hassle that goes with it, the having to count up and submit your certificates, having to determine if something is accredited or not, having to go to one place or another, and constantly looking for things. I mean, these are all the worst aspects of education, and it really, really puts a barrier towards getting to that place of empowerment. And those, I think, are the issues that north of the border, south of the border, we're facing with and we're dealing with.
Well, so we have 7 rocket boosters of influence, and the second rocket booster is expertise. And this is where you solidly fit in our influence continuum and with our launchpad and our whole system that we built here, because it is so important for advisors to have continuing education. They have to sharpen their saw, right? And it can't always just be the ethics course that everybody has to take so that you don't sell people stuff they don't need, and you say all of those things and you basically half pay attention. Let's talk about what they're paying attention to. You have a huge amount of courses that you not only know about, but that you've created and managed. What are you seeing that advisors are really dialing into and finding the greatest value to continue to make them better advisors?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing right now, Matt, is certainly there are rules and regulations, and so there's a bit of a top down and bottom up demand for that. Of course, your dealer firm, your compliance officers are talking about, you know, things like client focused reforms in Canada is a big thing. There's a big new regulations over the last couple of years that have come into play. So making sure to know and understand those, making sure that you're kind of following along with that. But it's also a demand from the bottom up. Advisors wanting to make sure that they understand what those rules and regulations and what that landscape is. Another big thing is vulnerable clients, protecting vulnerable clients. And on the surface of it, it sounds like it's pretty straightforward. Do the right thing, protect clients, whether they're vulnerable or not. But I think when you get down into the more details, you start to learn about different ways in which you can protect them, or understanding the different issues or the perpetrators, let's say, of vulnerable clients. And so I think that those are some of the bigger issues. Maybe broadly speaking, there's also a real interest and fascination about fraud. And of course, you see cryptocurrency and the whole FTX thing. And so wanting to understand a bigger picture of what are these issues? What are the problems? And then I would say that the other one is around finfluencers, which I think is another major area of concern, particularly for clients that might be looking or exposed to, social media, or where are you getting your sources of information if it's not getting it from your advisor? And an advisor can't be there in front of you at all times.
Right.
And so if you are there and you watching a video on something about you've got to get into this investment or that investment, that's an area of concern. So learning about finfluencers and how you protect against that, another big area as well.
So in the States here, you just hit on 3 things, and we're going to dive into this a little bit more deeply. You just opened a can of worms, brother. So the first one is we just had major SEC and FINRA regulation changes that a lot of advisors really need to get up to snuff on, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on what those mean, and you need to rely on your continuing education to find out what those are. So there's number one. Number two, which we refer to as the fiduciary standard here in the States, right? Which is making sure that you're always doing what's best for clients. But you said something that I really like, which is seeing the vulnerabilities in the areas of where they might be taken advantage of, not by the advisor per se, but having the advisor paying attention to it. That's really cool. But the last one is the one. So I have a whole presentation called Finfluencers is the New F Word. And the reason why that's the case is because if you're as an advisor, if you don't exist on social media, your competition does, right? It's just that simple. And we showed videos, TikTok videos of all of these people giving horrible advice, John, horrible, unregulated advice at that. And what do you need to do as a financial services professional to get in front of that? So how are you helping people through your educational system? Focus on that last one specifically. What are you doing, and how do you have conversations with advisors to help them overcome all of this negative influence?
I don't know that there's much that we can add to the advisor narrative about what they can or should be doing. I think that they share the same kind of concern as anyone else would have. Look, content that passes off as legitimate and exciting and coming from a subject matter expert or someone in a position of influence. I don't think there's a lot in the way that we can do to the advisor to say, look, you should be telling your clients not to watch YouTube or not to watch TikTok. It's a little bit more about reinforcing the message of, look, your clients are going to be exposed to all of this. So how do you look out for, or what are the ways that you can help guide your clients and let them know, look, this is where you're going to run into some red flags and where you should be mindful of. And I mean, the perfect and the obvious example, Matt, is, look, if you see someone who's touting returns and really promoting that, right off the bat, that's someone who's operating in an unregulated environment. And so, looking out for those red flags, I think is going to be it. But the other thing, and I think that this speaks to a little bit of a longer term strategy for Learnedly, which is we are designed for advisors, but our accessibility is for the general public, for the interested investor. And so it's a little bit like Costco. Look, Costco it's a wholesale place. It's designed for wholesalers, but it's the retailers that are there shopping. I shop there. I'm sure you do too. And, so they've made it very accessible to the retail public, although designed for wholesalers. And so for us, we look at Learnedly as this environment where, look, we're creating a definitive resource for advisors, but we're making it accessible for retail investors. So if they want to know where advisors are going to get their information, their source information, they can participate in a place that's not expensive and not difficult to access. Now, that's a little bit of a side point, but as it relates to influencers, look, it's a concerted effort, and it's a big one. I mean, amongst the regulators, it's amongst investors having their bullshit detectors on, and that's a lot like fraud. That's a lot like cybersecurity. A big part of it is it's just having your radar on and just being sensitive to what doesn't feel right or what feels a little bit off.
I'm a big fan of Costco. I always need the 5-gallon jar of mayonnaise. It's just one of those things that's absolutely fantastic. All right. Most of our listeners are consumers of continuing education, but I don't think they really realize the amount of work that has to go in to get something approved. And as weird as it sounds, that's actually fascinating to me. Like, I'd like to know a little bit about how you, north of the border here, really, what do you have to do if an advisor wants to contribute to continuing education? Let's talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, it is a challenge for sure. And it's, I think one of the challenges with the Canadian financial services industry is it's very fragmented. It's regulated at the provincial level, not the federal level. And so you're dealing with different provinces having different regulators, both for securities and for insurance. And every province has their own rules, their own regulations. I mean, there is a concerted effort to have some harmonization for sure, but there are multiple different accreditation bodies that we have to navigate. If it was one or two, I think we could. It would certainly be a whole lot easier, but it's not. So you have regulators. You have in Canada, we have the Mutual Fund Dealers Association and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, IROC, MFDA. These are self-regulatory organizations. They are about as close as you can get to a national body, although they're not the official securities regulators. They each have their continuing education requirements that are in place, but it's let's stop into one and let's stop into the other to get accredited and registered. Ironically enough, they're both actually coming together as to form one new self-regulatory organization, but we'll still be going to one to get it accredited and the other one to get it registered and paying the fees. So you've got that. You've got Quebec, which it operates in many ways very, very distinct to the rest of Canada. And so it has its own requirements that for anyone who's in Quebec, you have to get registered there and accredited. But then the other one is around insurance. So if you are an advisor in Canada, there's a good chance that you are dual licensed. You're licensed to offer and advise on securities, but also to offer and advise clients on insurance solutions as well. And so depending on which provinces you operate in, you're going to have continuing education, and sometimes multiple provinces have different accreditation bodies and requirements. And then on top of that, you've got the designations and credentials. So CFP, PFP, CIM, I mean, all of the alphabet soup of designations all have continuing education requirements, and they're not all the same. And so when we get a course accredited right across the board, we're dealing with 15 different accreditation bodies or entities. And the challenge, of course, is that, it's the same course through and through, but we're having to navigate 15 different places with the exact same thing. And so it's just burden on burden, which ultimately really just means that it's less education available for the industry or limited access for them.
What about the banks, dude? Like from a compliance standpoint, this is one of the big issues that we've had trying to break into the Canadian market. So many advisors are within banks, and we know here in the States, banks won't let you say anything about anything anytime at all. So how do banks play a part into all of this continuing education conundrum that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, in the large part, banks do a good job of supporting their employees and their advisors. I mean, if I can give credit to anyone in the industry, the banks certainly do have a good budget for training and ongoing education. But when it comes to continuing education, a lot of times that's left to the advisors themselves, the individuals to satisfy their own requirements. Maybe they get a budget, or maybe there's some sort of a reimbursement. But largely it's left to the individuals themselves to satisfy that or figure that out. So it is a bit of a challenge for sure. And the banks, the banks employ half of our entire industry. I mean, 5 or 6 banks have got 500,000 employees, and that's our industry right there. So it's a challenge, but large part it's left to their own devices for continuing education.
One of the things that we experience here in the States, and I experienced this when I was a life, health, and annuity licensed for many years, is the CE that I had to say was terrible, man. I mean, it was boring. I was kind of, really half-assedly doing it, to be brutally honest. It was on like a second screen, and I was clicking just to make sure that it knew I was there. And I'd answer the questions, which were not rocket science, right? Like, should you try to sell your client something they can't afford? Oh my God, you're asking me that question. So how can we change this, right? So part of what we want to be at ProudMouth is we truly want to be a disruptor in the industry, all in North America, actually, really, to be brutally honest and fully transparent, in the world. Things that are established the way that they shouldn't be the way that they are. They should fundamentally be destroyed and rebuilt. When it comes to continuing education, how can we make it more attractive to advisors so that they want to continue to do this instead of because they have to do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, it starts with, if there's an accreditation process and there's a fee for that accreditation, that needs to be removed from the equation. It's a conflict of interest, and let's just start with that. If the regulators are charging a fee per course accreditation, that it doesn't enhance the quality of the education. Mm-hmm. When we create courses, the regulators that we're thinking about, or the entities that we're thinking about and wanting to ensure that our standard is the highest, it's the regulators or the entities that actually don't charge us anything for the courses. We've been set up with a privilege with them to self-accredit courses, and that is such a nice position to be in with those individuals, that you just inherently want to create great content and never ever jeopardize that self-accredited status. And it would be right for all the accreditation bodies to establish that same thing. Look, here in Canada, we've got 125,000 registered securities advisors. Now, not all have continuing education, but let's just say the most part that they do, and now about 100,000 of them do. And if they're doing 20 or 30 hours of continuing education per year, and if you put $100 an hour, and I'm being conservative here in terms of what's the value of their time, you're starting to look at an economic impact that's somewhere $200 million, $300 million, $400 million a year. And so if you're going to make continuing education, do it right and make it very efficient for these individuals. That's a huge, huge part of the economy when you're thinking about hours spent on them. And so to bring it all back of, well, how do you make it more relevant? How do you make it really great? Well, if course providers are not trying to build something to appease or satisfy all of these different regulatory bodies and applications and everything else, we can focus more on the course content itself. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And it's not the other way around. And right now in Canada, and I suspect it's the same for the United States, the largest course providers in our space are not educators. They are fund companies.
True. Oh yeah.
And and they get charged too. So, I think if investors are ever wondering, well, why are your management expense ratios and fees so high? Well, a big part of it is that they spend a ton of money on course accreditation. So no fault for them to be in this space, but they certainly have an advantage when they are funded by the other revenue channels, like offering mutual funds or investments in general. So it does create an unlevel playing field, and that's okay. I don't mind. Certainly welcome a lot of competition in the space. But what ends up happening is advantage goes to suboptimal content if you're well funded enough and you can then get it accredited across as many bodies as possible. Mm-hmm. Advisors are looking for content, not content that is the best, but the most efficient.
Yeah.
And so if you know that you can knock off your 5 or 6 or 7 different CE requirements because a particular course has all of those accreditations, that's the most efficient way, not necessarily the best content. So sure. that is where I think that there's a real uneven aspect to continuing education and why advisors are not getting the best quality. They're just getting whatever is there in front of them and available.
In just my limited experience of being licensed for, 6 to 10 years, I didn't get any value. I didn't really learn anything that was going to make me better at, selling life, health, and annuity products. So, okay. Yeah. One of the other reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is because when we had talked previously, you had a couple of really good kind of calls to action for the audience to help them maybe from an advisor perspective, start trying to change the industry. Why don't we kind of wrap up the show with some of those thoughts today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and look, Matt, let me just say first and foremost, we're an education provider. And here we are in many ways advocating not no education or less education, but certainly more efficient and thinking about ways in which advisors can be more efficient. And even if that means slimming down some of the education that they have to do, I'm a former advisor, so I understand, look, people are busy and that's not necessarily what they want to do. It's what they need to do in order to get back to business and keep serving their clients. And so in some ways it feels like we're trying to sell ourselves short, but I think that also gives us the most amount of credibility to say, look, there's a problem in the industry and it needs to be addressed. So what can advisors do first and foremost? look, if they have 2, 3, 4 different continuing education requirements that they need to satisfy, it is worth spending a little bit of time to just figure out and coordinate what's what and how can I stack, or how can I make it the most efficient. Advisors can also just look and see, is it absolutely required that it is accredited by them, or it is registered by them, or that it be listed by them? I've noticed that accreditation bodies aren't always so forthcoming with that information. If it is optional, they tend not to really state the obvious and say, look, it's optional. So yes, we charge course providers, but you don't have to take any of the courses that we have listed here. So it's worth advisors knowing, look, is that a requirement, or is that just a nice thing to have? Because if it's a nice thing to have, you can open yourself up to a whole new world of solutions that are not just listed there, which tend to be courses, traditional courses. But you could also be looking at things like mentoring. You could be looking at things like, of course, you can be talking to groups, whether it's new Canadians or new Americans, people who are coming new to the industry and needing help, students, speaking, mentoring one-on-one or to groups. I mean, these are ways in which you can satisfy continuing education requirements if they allow it in your respective environments, without having to just, quote unquote, take a course to get it done. And look, let's face it, if you're taking a course to check off the box, it's perfunctory. It is something that you do not want to do. And that's the worst environment for actually learning something. You learn best when you need to know something and you're seeking the answer. That's just the inherent nature of us as adults. And the worst time to learn is when you're forced to, and you say, you have to do this. So continuing education in that environment is almost of no value. So if you can create value by teaching, educating, or being in an environment where you legitimately are learning something, I think that there is a defensible argument to say that should count towards continuing education, rather than, yes, I've answered this skill testing question and I showed up for a pre-recorded webinar.
Yeah. One of the things I remember when I submitted my first course for a CFP CE here in the States, it was about how to communicate more effectively with your clients by learning how to listen, right? Which you would think, well, holy crap, if there's something they need to know is to shut the hell up and actually listen to what their clients are saying. Couldn't get it approved. It wasn't one of the categories that they had said was important. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second. It's so client service ethics. I mean, all of these sorts of things. But I really hope that financial services professionals all across North America realize that they have an enormous amount of power, and there are organizations that they can go to in order, like your organization, where they can actually see what's out there and then talk to their regulators to make it so that those regulators realize that what is being offered is not actually as beneficial as it should be. Necessary to get up to date on regulations? Absolutely, all men, they should do that all day long. But when it comes to continuing education, helping you be a better advisor, if that's where the focus could be with education that is mandatory for licensed professionals to have, I think our world would be a much better place.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Matt. And look, I've yet to speak to an advisor who said, look, I don't support continuing education. Right. I don't believe it. I don't believe in its value. I've yet to met a single individual who's said that or felt that way. But when it comes to the hassle or the burden or these loopholes and all these requirements that go along with it, I mean, people are leaving the industry because it's just more than they care to handle. We've talked to a number who said, look, I'm out. This was the last thing. And I'm so done with this. So what are we really doing as an industry if we've gotten to a state where, look, the burden is so great? And let's not mince this with, oftentimes I think it might be quick for a regulator or a body to say, well, look, people don't like the education, and it's not that at all. Actually, people really quite enjoy the education, but they don't enjoy the administrative aspect that goes along with it, and it takes up a lot of their time. And the other thing I think is worth mentioning is, like, if you are dual licensed and you do have multiple designations, I mean, it's worth understanding and ensuring that you're not stacking on top of, all of these. Make sure that it's more efficient, that you are, like, if you've got 20 credit requirement, 15 credit requirement, a 30 credit requirement, like, you shouldn't stack that up into, 75 or 100. Should figure out a way to make it more efficient. And I think that's the big message to the regulators too, is to say, look, your most educated and your most serviceable advisors in the industry are being burdened the most. And it's a disincentive for anyone to want to have more credentials, to be dual licensed. So advantage goes to the least educated and the least licensed.
Yeah. Well, here in the States, there are people dropping licenses left and right for lots of reasons. And the educational requirement happens to be one of them. All right, John, if anybody wants to reach out and find out more about Learnedly, where should they go?
Yeah, easiest thing to do is just come to our website, learnedly.com. And we've got everything there. And check it out, and be great to have some people, even from the United States. And we've got 250 courses on our platform right now, and constantly growing. So north of the border, south of the border, we're building a universal solution for everyone.
Fantastic. Well, John, listen, man, I wish you all of the luck in the Great White North, my friend. I hope that we can continue to apply pressure all over North America so that continuing education is actually of great value to the advisors, so that they can provide even better services to their clients. So thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So if you're looking for continuing education, go to learnedly.com. If you're looking for education on how to market yourself more effectively, go to the PodRocket Academy, which is podrocketacademy.com, or just go to proudmouth.com and find out how you can sign up. So for John and Learnedly and all of us here at ProudMouth, this is Matt Halloran. We'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.